Emily had always been the silent pillar of the family. For years, she had lived under the radar, blending into the background while her daughter Clara, the life of every room, shone brightly. But tonight was different. Tonight, she wasn't in the background. Tonight, she was trapped. The laughter from the birthday party downstairs seemed muffled, almost distant, as Emily sat alone in the cold, dimly lit attic. She could hear the muffled sounds of her daughter and the guests celebrating, the clinking of glasses and the hum of casual conversation. But she wasn't a part of that world anymore. She wasn't a part of Clara's life anymore. A door had slammed shut behind her only moments ago, locked, and standing outside of it was John, her son-in-law, the man who had always seemed so warm, so friendly, yet now appeared as cold as the metal key that was still in his pocket. "You won't leave this attic until you tell me where it is," he had said, his voice calm, but the weight of his words like a stone around her chest. Emily's heart raced. How had it come to this? She had worked so hard for this family. She had kept their secrets, carried their burdens, and now it seemed the family she had protected for so long was turning against her. But it wasn't just any secret. It was the secret, the location of the will, the one that could change everything. The will that had been hidden for years, tucked away where only Emily knew its location. And John, the man who had always been polite and kind, was demanding it, with a force that chilled her to the bone. She knew he wasn't going to back down. She knew the clock was ticking. With each passing second, the stakes grew higher. John wouldn't leave until she gave him what he wanted. She could already hear the pressure in his voice, the frustration building. Emily was alone in this attic, with nothing but the distant echoes of the party and the weight of a legacy hanging over her head. She closed her eyes, trying to steady herself. The truth that could tear her family apart, was within her reach. Would she finally reveal it, or would she continue to protect them from the disaster that could unfold if the secret came to light? She heard the footsteps approaching, John's figure casting a shadow against the cracked door. She had no choice. The only way out was through the truth. Before the chaos, Emily's life had been simple, quiet, and predictable. She had grown up on the farm, just like her parents and grandparents before her. The land was everything, her roots, her past, and her future. Her father had always said, "This land is more than just soil. It's our legacy. It's who we are." Emily had taken those words to heart, working the fields, tending the animals, and building a life around the farm's rhythms. Emily had married young, to a man named George, a steady and reliable partner who shared her love for the land. Together, they had built a home on the farm, a warm, welcoming space filled with laughter and the scent of fresh bread baking in the oven. George was her rock, calm, patient, and always there when she needed him. Their love had been simple but enduring, like the land they worked so hard to preserve. When Clara, their only daughter, was born, Emily's world changed. Clara was full of life, a curious child with a zest for adventure. Emily often found herself watching her daughter run around the yard, playing with the dogs or exploring the woods, and thinking how different Clara was from her. Where Emily was calm and reserved, Clara was bold and expressive. It had always been clear that Clara would one day take over the farm, and Emily had always planned to pass the torch to her. But Emily also knew that Clara had her own dreams. As the years passed, Clara grew less interested in the farm's day-to-day operations. She wanted more than the land, more than the small town they lived in, more than the life Emily had carefully built for her. It broke Emily's heart, but she understood. Clara was young, full of ambition, and had the world at her feet. Emily had always respected her daughter's drive, even as it began to pull her away from the farm. Then, as time went on, Emily had met John. He had come into Clara's life like a whirlwind, charming, intelligent, and with just enough ambition to make Emily uneasy. But Clara had fallen for him, and Emily, wanting to support her daughter, welcomed him into their family with open arms. John fit in well at first. He shared Emily's love of the land and seemed to respect the family's legacy. But as the years went by, Emily began to notice subtle changes. John wasn't just interested in the farm, he wanted to control it. He wanted to make decisions that went against the very principles that had been passed down through generations. Emily kept quiet, dismissing her growing unease as nothing more than a mother's protectiveness. But deep down, she knew something was off. In those early days, Emily would often reflect on how different everything felt. What was once a family built on trust, love, and shared goals had slowly begun to fracture. Clara was pulling away, and John was pushing to take the reins of the family's most precious asset. Emily's mind was clouded with worry, but it was the way he looked at her, too calculating, too determined, that made her nervous. It wasn't just the farm anymore, it was everything. And she couldn't shake the feeling that John had his eyes on something far more valuable than just land. Emily had hoped for years that things would return to the way they were, that Clara would see the value in the farm and continue the legacy. But deep down, Emily knew that once the truth came to light, everything would change. And as much as she wanted to protect her family from the inevitable, she could already feel the storm on the horizon. It was supposed to be a simple celebration, a birthday dinner for Clara, a small gathering of close family and friends. Emily had even baked her daughter's favorite cake, a gesture of love that had always been a tradition between them. But the evening, meant to be filled with joy, quickly descended into something else entirely. The tension had been building for weeks, though Emily had tried to ignore it. John had been acting strangely, distant and cold in a way she hadn't seen before. He had been pressuring Clara to sell the farm, claiming it was time to modernize, to turn it into something bigger. Emily had never liked the idea, but Clara seemed to be warming to it, caught up in the dream of a future that was far removed from the land they had worked so hard to preserve. The night of the party, things took an unexpected turn. After dinner, while everyone else was distracted with conversation and laughter, John had asked Emily to come into the study. He'd been polite, almost too polite, his smile thin and insincere. "I need to talk to you about something important," he had said, his voice too calm, too controlled. Emily had hesitated. There was something about the way he looked at her, something cold behind his eyes. But she agreed, following him into the study, her mind already racing with what this might be about. Once they were alone, John didn't waste any time. "Where is it, Emily?" he asked, his voice steady but forceful. "Where is the will?" She froze. The room seemed to close in around her, and her heart skipped a beat. The will. She had hidden it away years ago, in a place where only she knew, a secret she had sworn never to reveal. It was the only thing that could protect the farm from the kind of change John wanted to impose. She had kept it hidden for so long, certain that one day it would protect her family, her legacy. But now, John was demanding it. "What are you talking about?" Emily said, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know what you mean." John's expression hardened. He stepped closer, his voice dropping into a whisper. "Don't play dumb with me. I know you have it. The will. I need it." Emily's mind raced. She knew what he wanted. The farm was her most valuable possession, and the will would determine its future. She couldn't let him have it. Not like this. Not after everything he'd already taken from her. "No," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. "You don't understand. You can't just take it." John's eyes narrowed. He was no longer the charming man she had once welcomed into her family. He was someone else entirely, someone cold and determined. "I don't need to understand, Emily. I need that will, and I'm not leaving until I have it." Before Emily could react, he was at the door, turning the lock. "You'll stay up here until you decide to give it to me," he said, his voice now laced with an unmistakable threat. "You won't leave until I get what I want." With a final glance, he left the study, leaving Emily in stunned silence. She stood there for a moment, trying to comprehend what had just happened, but the truth was clear. This wasn't just about the farm. It was about control, and John was going to stop at nothing to get it. Her breathing grew shallow as the weight of the situation settled in. She was locked in the attic, with no way out, and John wasn't going to give up until he had what he came for. Emily's heart pounded in her chest. She had never imagined it would come to this, her family turning against her, her son-in-law threatening her for something so precious. The farm, her life's work, was now the center of a battle she wasn't prepared for. The minutes dragged on, each one heavier than the last. Emily sat in the dim light of the attic, her back pressed against the cold wood. Her mind was a storm of confusion and fear. She had always tried to protect her family, keep them safe from the harsh realities of life. But now, the very thing she had protected most, the farm, her legacy, was being torn apart by the very people she loved. She could hear the muffled sounds of the party below, the chatter, the laughter, the clinking of glasses. It felt like a cruel joke. How could everyone be so oblivious? How could they be so oblivious to what was happening just a few floors above them? Emily's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden creak from the floorboards. She stiffened, her pulse quickening. Was it John again, coming to demand the will? Or was it someone else, someone who didn't know what had transpired? She hoped it was Clara. Maybe her daughter would come to her. Maybe she would understand. But no one came. The footsteps faded away, and the sounds of the party continued below. Emily's throat tightened as she thought about Clara. How had it come to this? How had her sweet daughter, the girl she had raised with so much love, ended up marrying someone like John? Emily had always known that John had ambition, but she had never imagined it would be so consuming. It was clear now that the man she had once trusted was nothing more than a manipulator. He had wormed his way into Clara's life, and now he was trying to take control of everything that Emily had spent her life building. Her eyes stung with tears, but she refused to let them fall. Crying wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't bring back the family she had once known. It wouldn't make John stop. Emily knew that now. The only thing she could do was stay strong and protect what was left. But how? Her mind turned to the will, the key to everything. It had been hidden so carefully, a secret she had sworn to keep for Clara's sake. Emily had always thought that one day her daughter would understand why she had hidden it away. But now, as she sat alone in the attic, the weight of that secret felt heavier than ever. John's words echoed in her mind. "You won't leave until you tell me where it is." He wasn't bluffing. He would do whatever it took to get the will. Emily knew that much. But she also knew that revealing the truth would be a disaster. The farm would be sold, torn apart, its legacy erased in an instant. All the hard work, all the sacrifices she and George had made over the years, gone in a flash. Emily took a deep breath, steadying herself. She couldn't let that happen. She wouldn't let that happen. But she also couldn't keep the truth hidden forever. So much was at stake now, and every choice she made would have consequences. The decision wasn't just about the farm anymore. It was about her family, the future. The silence of the attic pressed in around her. Time seemed to slow, each second stretching out into eternity. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing on her chest. The consequences of the next move she made would shape the rest of her life, and the lives of those she loved. She had always been the protector, but now she had to choose: protect her family from the truth, or protect her family by revealing it. As Emily sat alone in the attic, the weight of her thoughts grew unbearable. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence, marking each passing second as if counting down to some inevitable end. She had spent her life avoiding conflict, keeping the peace, making sure her family stayed united. But now that fragile unity was crumbling. She couldn't hide from it anymore. The truth had to come out, whether she was ready or not. Her mind kept returning to Clara. Emily's heart ached as she thought about her daughter, the young girl who had once adored the farm, who had run through the fields with wild abandon, who had laughed so freely. The farm had been Clara's heritage, her future. But now, it was just another obstacle, something to be sold, something to be abandoned. John had convinced her of that. He had shown her the dream of something bigger, something outside of the farm, and slowly he had pulled Clara away. Emily had tried to warn her, tried to make her see that the farm was more than just land. It was their legacy. It was the foundation of everything they were. But Emily's warnings had fallen on deaf ears. Clara had been too caught up in the excitement of a new life, a new future, and had failed to see the damage it was causing. As the door creaked again, this time with purpose, Emily's heart stopped. It was John, back to finish what he had started. But Emily wasn't afraid anymore. She was done being silent, done being the passive bystander in her own life. It was time to stop hiding. She stood up slowly, her legs stiff from the hours spent sitting in the cold attic. She walked toward the door, her hand resting on the doorknob. She didn't know what the outcome would be, but she knew one thing for sure. She was no longer going to let John control her. When the door swung open, there stood John, his face impassive, his eyes calculating. "I thought you'd be reasonable," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I've had enough of being reasonable," Emily said, her voice steady, her gaze unwavering. "The will stay hidden, John. If you want it, you'll have to tear this family apart. But I won't let you destroy what's left of it." John's eyes narrowed, his expression hardening. "You're making a mistake, Emily," he said, his voice low, almost threatening. "You'll regret this." Emily didn't flinch. She stood her ground. The fear she had felt earlier had melted away, replaced by something stronger, something she hadn't felt in a long time: determination. She wasn't just protecting the farm anymore. She was protecting her family, her daughter's future, and her own dignity. "I'll regret letting you destroy us," Emily replied, her voice firm. "But I won't regret standing up for what's right." For the first time in years, Emily felt a surge of power. It wasn't just about the farm. It wasn't just about the will. It was about her family's integrity, the foundation of everything they had built together, and she wasn't going to let John take that away. As John's face twisted in frustration, Emily knew the battle wasn't over. But this time, she wasn't going to fight in the shadows. She was ready to face the consequences, whatever they might be. Months passed after that night. The dust had settled, but the weight of Emily's decision still lingered in the air, a quiet reminder of the battle she had fought. Life, however, continued. People moved on, as they always did, but Emily knew nothing would ever be quite the same again. Clara, despite the tension, still called her mother every week. Their conversations were short, polite, but there was an undeniable distance between them now. Emily had seen the change in her daughter's eyes, the sadness, the confusion. Clara had been caught in the middle, torn between the life she had once wanted and the future John promised. But now Emily knew that her daughter was beginning to realize the cost of those dreams. The farm, for now, remained untouched. Emily had refused to reveal the location of the will, and John, despite his insistence, had backed off. It had been a standoff, a battle of wills, but the silence between the family members spoke volumes. As the seasons changed, Emily spent her days working the land alone. The fields were quieter than before. George, her late husband, had always been there to share the work, to walk alongside her as they tended to the soil. But now, it was just her, a widow to the land, as much as she was to the memory of George. She still kept his favorite chair on the porch, and every evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Emily would sit there, feeling the weight of time in her bones. The world around her seemed to move at a different pace, slower in some ways, faster in others. She watched as the younger generation, the ones who had once run through the fields with Clara, now grew up and moved away. Some had gone to college, some had started their own families. Life had a way of moving forward, even when you were reluctant to let go. Emily had tried to keep up with the changes, but the truth was, the farm felt different now. It was no longer just a place of work and memories. It had become a symbol of the decisions she had made, of the choices that had split her family apart. She couldn't help but wonder if the land itself had grown tired, worn down by the same weight she carried every day. Clara came to visit once, just before the holidays. It was awkward at first, neither of them knowing how to bridge the distance that had grown between them. But as they sat at the kitchen table, Emily watched her daughter more closely than she had in months. Clara had changed. The lightness that had once defined her was gone, replaced with a guarded, thoughtful expression. She was no longer the carefree young woman who had run around the farm with wild abandon. "Mum, I've been thinking about everything," Clara said, her voice soft, hesitant. "About the farm, about everything. I don't know if I ever really understood why you kept it hidden, but I'm starting to realize it wasn't just about the land, was it?" Emily had said nothing at first. She had simply looked at her daughter, knowing that the time was coming, the time to reveal everything, the truth behind the will, the decisions she had made, the years of sacrifice. Emily had known that Clara needed to understand, needed to see the farm the way Emily had always seen it, not just as a place, but as a legacy. But Emily didn't say anything yet. She wasn't ready. She needed time. She stood up and went to the window, looking out over the fields. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow across the land. It was a beautiful sight, one that had brought her peace for years. And yet, in the distance, she could see something else. The shadows of change were creeping closer. Clara was no longer the child who had run through those fields, and John was no longer the man Emily had once trusted. But there, beyond all the uncertainty, was the land, the farm, the place where everything had started and where, in some way, everything would end. It was the coldest winter Emily could remember. The snow had settled on the land like a thick blanket, covering everything in a still, quiet silence. The world seemed to hold its breath, and so did Emily. She knew it was only a matter of time before the confrontation would come. The storm had been brewing for months, and now it was inevitable. Clara had returned for the holidays, just as Emily had known she would. She had sent a message in the morning asking if they could talk. It had been a long time since they had truly talked. They had both avoided it, danced around the truth, but today Emily knew the time had come. It was late afternoon when Clara arrived at the farm, the crunch of her boots on the snow the only sound breaking the heavy silence. Emily was sitting by the fire, the warmth of the flames flickering against the dark, quiet house. Clara stood in the doorway, looking at her mother, but there was something different in her eyes, something serious. "Mom," Clara said softly, stepping inside, "we need to talk." Emily didn't say anything at first. She simply gestured for Clara to sit across from her. The room was small, cozy, but the space between them felt as vast as the fields outside. Clara hesitated for a moment, then sat down. "About the farm," Clara began. "I've been thinking a lot about it, about everything. I know I haven't been the daughter you wanted me to be. I know I've been distant, and I understand why you've been hiding the will from me, why you've been trying to protect it." Emily's heart clenched in her chest. This was it, the moment she had dreaded. But it wasn't the confrontation with John that she had feared. It was this. This quiet, painful acknowledgement from her daughter that everything they had fought for had brought them to this point. The point of no return. Clara's voice trembled as she continued. "I've been so angry with you, Mom. I've blamed you for holding on to something that felt like it was holding me back. But now I see what you were trying to protect." Emily's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure whether it was the relief of hearing Clara's words or the pain of knowing how much had been lost in the process, but she found it hard to speak. "I've been so focused on what I wanted, what I thought was best for me, that I didn't realize what I was losing," Clara said, her eyes searching Emily's face. "I can't change everything, I can't undo the past, but I want to try. I want to try to fix things, Mom, for us, for the farm." It felt like the world was standing still. Emily could hear the wind howling outside, but inside, everything was silent. Clara had always been the one who ran, who dreamed of something more. But now, here she was, speaking the words that Emily had always longed to hear. Emily stood up slowly, her hands trembling, and walked over to where Clara sat. She reached out and took her daughter's hands, feeling the warmth of her touch, the connection that had always been there, despite everything. "I've kept the truth from you, Clara," Emily said, her voice thick with emotion. "Not because I didn't trust you, but because I didn't want to lose you. This farm, it's more than just land. It's our family, it's our history, and it's always been yours." Clara's eyes filled with tears and she nodded. "I know, Mom, I know." The door opened suddenly, cutting through the moment. Emily turned sharply, her breath catching in her throat as John stepped into the room, his presence looming like a storm cloud. His expression was cold, unreadable. "This conversation is over," John said flatly, his eyes narrowing as he looked from Clara to Emily. "The will be handed over now. No more games." Clara stood up, her back straight, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "No, John, we're not doing this. Not like this. I'm not going to let you control everything." John's face darkened. "You don't have a choice." But Clara didn't back down. "I do. And this time, I'm choosing the farm. I'm choosing my family." In that moment, Emily realized that everything they had fought for, the farm, the legacy, the truth, had finally found its place. Clara had made her choice. She had chosen to stand by the land, by her family, by Emily. The tension in the room was thick, but for the first time in months, Emily felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. This wasn't over, not yet, but they had reached the turning point. Clara was no longer the girl who had run away from her heritage. She was the woman who was finally ready to fight for it. John's glare softened, just for a moment, as he saw the resolve in Clara's eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but Emily cut him off. "No more," she said firmly. "No more games, no more manipulation, it's over." The battle was far from won, but Emily knew now that they had the strength to face whatever came next, together. As the days following the confrontation passed, Emily found herself sitting on the porch again, just as she had so many times before. The snow had melted, and the first signs of spring were creeping across the land. The days were longer, and the world seemed to have come alive once more, just as Emily was beginning to feel a new sense of hope stirring in her chest. She thought about everything that had happened, the secrets, the lies, the pain, and the ultimate decision to stand up for what she believed in. It had all come to a head in a moment of truth. The farm, the will, the legacy, it had all led to this point. But what had truly mattered wasn't just the farm or the property. It was the family. It was the relationships. It was the shared history that bound them all together. In the end, it wasn't about keeping the farm or winning a battle. It was about choosing to protect the things that truly mattered, the people she loved, the memories they had built together, and the future they could still create. Emily had been afraid for so long, afraid of losing everything. But in that fear, she had forgotten one important truth. Sometimes you have to lose something to gain something greater. Her thoughts turned to Clara. Emily smiled to herself as she thought about her daughter, how far she had come, how much she had grown. Clara had finally made the choice to stay, to fight for the land, to understand what it meant to carry the weight of their family's history. Emily knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be more challenges ahead, more difficult decisions to make, but they would face them together as a family. And then there was John. Emily didn't know what the future held for him, but in that moment, she didn't care. John's influence, his control, had already begun to fade. The farm, the heart of their family, was stronger than any outsider could ever be. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow over the fields. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth on her face. There was still so much to be done, so many decisions to be made, but for the first time in a long while, Emily felt at peace. She had chosen her family. She had chosen the truth. Life had a way of testing you, of pushing you to your limits. But in the end, Emily had learned that it wasn't the external battles that defined you, it was the choices you made in the face of adversity. It was about standing up for what you believed in, even when it seemed like the world was against you. And as Emily sat there watching the last light of day fade into the horizon, she realized that sometimes the hardest battles led to the most important victories. Her family was still intact, the farm was still standing, and Clara, her daughter, was no longer lost. She was home. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button below. Your support means the world, and it helps us bring more stories like this to life. What do you think? Would you have handled things differently than Emily or Clara? Let us know in the comments. We love hearing your thoughts and ideas. And if you want to hear more stories full of drama, family secrets, and emotional twists, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. We've got plenty more coming your way.